All right, Chris Hall here for Dogs on Demand on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all those other places. Good to have you along with us today as Bryce Koon joins us now. Bryce, he is the writer, digital reporter. Make sure I get this right, Bryce. At LSU Tigers on 247 Sports. He covers the LSU Tigers. And, of course, he hosts the Crowded Booth podcast. Bryce is on our program today. We're going to talk a little SEC football and compare Georgia with LSU. Bryce, welcome to the program. How you doing, my man?
Oh, doing well. We were joking, Chris, before we started. Where is it hotter, back in my home state of Georgia or down here? Heat index, I just looked in between us talking about it, 103 today. So it's a toasty day. You could probably I'll make dinner outside. Throw it on the pavement, and we'll go from there.
There you go. As we are recording this, I think we're at about 92 degrees where we are in South Georgia. So it is summertime. The 1st of July coming up very soon, and so let's don't complain too much about it. But when it's just day after day of oppressive heat, like you guys are having in Texas and Louisiana, it does kind of grind on you a little bit. Of course, now you're covering the LSU Tigers for 247 Sports. Tell me a little bit about, how that new gig is going, and are you loving it down south in Louisiana?
Oh man, it's going well so far. We were joking, been here about 3 weeks. We've been in the heat advisory every single day since. Other than that, no, it's been going really well. And look, it's a chance to cover a program that obviously made it to the SEC title in Brian Kelly's first year. We were talking beforehand. We have the baseball national championship parade tonight, women's basketball. So I think anytime you get a chance, especially as a kid growing up in SEC country, to cover a proud program, a program with a rich tradition and a diehard fan base like this, it's pretty special. So excited to kind of get going down here in Baton Rouge. Been covering them remotely from Georgia and then moved down here with my wife. And man, we're enjoying it so far. And I'll tell you, Chris, next time you see me, hopefully I won't be heftier. Okay. The food down here, it's a real thing. It's a real thing down here.
They pay no attention to calories or anything like that. So, and if you start to using that Cajun brogue on me now, we may have to call timeout. But
I got you. That's the editing.
I love that. I love that talk. Indeed. Speaking of LSU baseball, just won the national championship. Georgia has the new head baseball coach of the University of Georgia, Wes Johnson, the LSU pitching coach for this year. Well, what can you tell us about Wes, and what kind of baseball coach is the University of Georgia getting?
Yeah, I really liked this hire for Georgia. I mean, obviously, it was one of those things that LSU kept close to the vest as Wes wanted to finish out the run with LSU and see how far they could go. But you have to look no further than the young man that will probably be a top 3 pick next month in the MLB draft. It's Paul Skeens, who dominated coming from Air Force out of the portal. Go back and look at the pitching performance, especially over the past week or so when LSU needed it. Look, offensively, you could talk a lot about this team, but when they needed it on the mound, it was this pitching staff that came through, and they all give credit to Johnson, his ability. And I think the biggest thing, Chris, in this is, look, Wes knew coming into the season they were going to have talent, and it was never a question of that. But in the multiple interviews we've done with him, he said, he spent time in the major leagues. I don't know if you know this. He took the LSU midway through being the Minnesota Twins major league pitching coach back in 2022. So he said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and leave during the middle of the season. That was a Twins team that was number 1 in the AL Central, and that our Atlanta Braves just knocked off in a nice little series sweep. We'll get to that later. But I think the biggest thing that Wes likes to hit on is the mental side. And look, if you're going to win a championship as a pitcher, you have to be mentally more mature than the guy at the plate. And so, look, Georgia's going to bring in talent. It's a rich state in baseball, but I think getting over the hump and getting back to where they want to be in the SEC conversation, in the Omaha type of conversation, was a good first step. And I think Georgia fans are going to be pleased with what Wes Johnson can do through the portal and really revamping this Georgia baseball program.
Yeah, we look forward to it. Wes Johnson, he's a proven talent, and I think I agree with you. I think it's a good hire for the University of Georgia. Well, what are we, 60-something days away from the start of the college football season, believe it or not. And so let's talk a little bit about, college football. I noticed that Coach Jim Harbaugh from Michigan, the Michigan Wolverines, they have incorporated into their practices what they call the Beat Georgia segment of their practices, and they have the Beat Ohio State segment. That's been a staple for years. When the Michigan team gets together, and I don't know what all that consists of. Maybe they look at schemes that Ohio State has, had in the past, and they kind of practice against that or prepare for Ohio State. Of course, that's their big rival. But now they have incorporated in their practices a Beat Georgia segment, which I guess they kind of concentrate on the University of Georgia. I'm kind of wondering, now that you're covering LSU, Georgia back-to-back national champions, setting the standard, for the past couple of years for college football. I wonder how, LSU and teams like that, do they look at Georgia in that way and say, okay, as we get together, let's think about a potential maybe somewhere down the line matchup with Georgia, and how would we beat them? Is that something that you find maybe at LSU? And what do you think? Is that a common thing around the conference as they look at Georgia?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, Chris, you have to start off, you have to have a balance.
Yeah.
Look, you don't want to obsess over what University of Georgia has done if you're LSU, Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, any of these teams. But you do have to respect the fact that if you're in the SEC East, you're going to have to go through Athens at least, or have them come to your place and beat them. If you're in the SEC West, albeit you could probably still get 2 teams in the playoff, and as the playoff expands more, if you want at least that automatic bid, you're going to have a date with Georgia somewhere on the schedule, it feels like right now, and for the foreseeable future. So specifically with LSU, one of the biggest things when Brian Kelly came in last season was the ability to worry about yourself and improve yourself before start worrying about others. And look, that worked last year for them. They knocked off Alabama, knocked off a Florida team down there, really turned around their season in Gainesville, and then knocked off Ole Miss as well, that allowed them to get to Atlanta. So, where does it stand now? Look, obviously you're going to say for the past, 10, 12, 15 years, it feels like everyone say, what can we do to beat Bama? Look, there's going to be things you adopt. And now it's kind of changed to Georgia. The biggest thing adopting wise, and it's one thing that offensive coordinator for LSU, Mike Denbrock, has been very open about, is, the evolution of the tight end position, specifically at LSU. We all see what Georgia has in that room. Even with Darnell Washington leaving and a couple other guys, they still have Brock Bowers. They still got a litany of talent, Oscar Delt behind them, and more to come. LSU kind of started that last year. They got Mason Taylor, if you remember, the kid that caught the pass to tie the game and then win the game in overtime. They started to add some more weapons there to become more diverse. And, I think that it's something where you're going to see teams shift with the changes of the game, but maybe obsessing over a specific, let's say, logo on the side of the helmet is not the way to go. But right. I guarantee you this, if LSU wants to get to the national title game with a schedule that's over there in Athens, you got to feel pretty solid that you're going to have to face Georgia and Atlanta, and maybe at least one time, maybe 2 times, to kind of throw up that national championship trophy this season.
And speaking of the 2023 season for LSU, well, let's just start off with the game, right? Yeah. Sunday, September the 3rd with Florida State. Florida State, a lot of people have high anticipation for Florida State, and maybe a team that's back perhaps to where Florida State has been in the past. Compared to what Georgia is going to open with UT Martin, you have LSU and Florida State. That game maybe will set the standard for the season for both of these teams. What is LSU saying about Florida State?
Well, the biggest thing is they're still remembering what happened in New Orleans last season. Obviously, a hard-fought but a tough loss for the Tigers down there in their own backyard. Now they get to head to kind of, I guess we'll call it Tallahassee's backyard. I guess you could say Orlando is that, not quite. But, the big thing is LSU's got to go into this game knowing this one thing, and we're going to talk about this on our podcast and then continuing to go, and I'll say it here. While this game definitely sets the tone, it doesn't make or break. You still play in the SEC. There's still a path. I would say arguably this is a bigger game in the sense of make or break a season for Florida State. Just with the quality of competition they're going to be facing, obviously they're going to have Clemson on the schedule. But outside of that, this is a resume-defining win. Many people think it's going to be maybe a top 5 matchup. Most definitely feels like a top 10 matchup. Look, there's a lot of steam heading into this game. And I think if you're LSU, you feel good about where you are. And look, there's obviously still some guys on that roster. Jaden Daniels, the biggest name, that feels like he wasn't at full strength. It was his first game in the purple and gold. And so now, a year under his belt, newer to the system now, I'm going to be excited to watch what those guys and how they try to handle business down there in Orlando. Chris, I don't know about you, man. I mean, that's going to be, even if I wasn't covering the game, that's going to be a must-watch game for me that opening weekend.
Absolutely, and that's going to be a marquee matchup for sure. Coming into the season for the University of Georgia, Georgia's loaded, LSU's loaded, Georgia's loaded, LSU's loaded. I think for Georgia, the thing that maybe separates Georgia from LSU, maybe, I don't know, maybe sort of in a negative way, is the quarterback position. Georgia now has uncertainty at that quarterback. At quarterback, it seems like Carson Beck is the man, and he's going to be starting, and he's going to have the first opportunity to be the starting quarterback at the University of Georgia. But there's a lot of uncertainty with the quarterback at the position at Georgia simply because of the lack of reps and in big games and that kind of thing that the Georgia quarterback room has. On the other side, Jaden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier, the LSU quarterback room looks pretty good. And, pretty good talent there. What do you think in comparison to those two with Carson Beck, Brock Vandegrift, Gunnar Stockton in the Georgia room? Then you have Daniels and Nussmeier. And at LSU, how do you compare those two quarterback rooms?
Yeah, I'll be careful in how I say this because I know the Georgia fans' response will be interesting. For me, in this, based off what we know here at the end of June and early July, I think that LSU's quarterback room is the most talented in the SEC. I think that you have two guys capable of starting. Now, that's not to say the potential of what could happen in Athens. Look, I'm a Carson Beck fan. I like what he brings to the table: intangible, size, height. He pops off the charts with all of those. But I think what you have down in Baton Rouge, if, God forbid something were to happen to Jaden Daniels, Georgia fans saw it, LSU fans saw it in Atlanta back last December. Nussmeier's a guy that can go and sling the ball around. And he can make some plays. So you feel good about your depth there at quarterback. And speaking with Georgia, I mean, look, I was watching a podcast and Aaron Murray was recently on. He talked about, look, he's probably the most talented kid in that room, and he probably has been, even with Stetson Bennett in that room. And so I like what Beck brings to the table, but it's just one of those things where you haven't seen him necessarily take really meaningful snaps in high-pressure situations. And look, I mean, Georgia may not have a lot of high-pressure situations this year, but going on the road to Auburn, still not a tough place to go and win a football game. The Florida game, Tennessee, Ole Miss. I mean, look, there's a lot of games where he's going to have to, I think, at some point, and that seems to be the reoccurring theme. Is the quarterback never going to have to shoulder the weight? Well, I believe that Stetson Bennett did. Will Carson Beck have a moment like that this year? And that'll be something kind of interesting to watch.
For me, speaking of Stetson Bennett, for me, it was just the intangibles with Stetson. He had such leadership qualities. And, man, he played with a chip on his shoulder. Now,
no doubt.
He was kicked to the curb so many times. And here he comes in with this swagger and two-time national champion. Who can argue with that? You either loved him or you hated him. And we love Stetson Bennett, of course, here in Georgia football territory. And kind of excited to see what happens with the Rams,
True.
with him. It's with Carson. Carson's a very talented guy. He's got arm strength galore. You just kind of wonder, when you get in those situations like you talk about, you're taking on Auburn, you're taking on Tennessee, you're taking on Florida. You get into that pressure cooker where you're the man in the game, and the quarterback position is so very important, of course. You kind of hope that he's able to do, to some extent, provide the leadership and the ability that Stetson Bennett did. So it's going to be interesting on the Georgia side with the quarterback room. Let's talk a little bit about the schedule for Georgia. Georgia's rated from maybe the easiest schedule in the SEC. Now, to their credit, Georgia did have Oklahoma scheduled for this season, but the SEC said, no, you can't do that with Texas and Oklahoma coming into the conference. So they, required Georgia to drop that game and required Oklahoma to drop that game. But here's the starting the games for the University of Georgia, the games they will begin with. UT Martin, you expect obviously Georgia to win that game. Ball State, that was the Oklahoma game. Ball State, And then you have South Carolina, and Georgia will be taking on South Carolina. Then you have UAB. Then Auburn, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Florida, Missouri, Ole Miss. The Tennessee game's the one I've got circled, going to Nashville. And then you close out with Georgia Tech. Now, you look at that schedule, you think, okay, Georgia's gone undefeated 2 consecutive years in the SEC during the regular season, undefeated season last year. You kind of look at that and say, if everything falls into place with the talent that Georgia has, I don't know. You may be looking at another undefeated season, which would be, stratospheric as far as the history of college football. Georgia has that potential. As you look at that schedule, Tennessee, maybe, Ole Miss. Who do you think is going to be the biggest challenge to Georgia?
Well, I think going to Knoxville is going to create the environment that a lot like we saw when Alabama traveled up there. Now, do I think that this year's team of Tennessee is as talented as what Tennessee had last year? Not necessarily. I do believe that when you look at what Georgia has coming in talent-wise, we talked about it, they're absolutely loaded once again at seemingly every single position. But what Georgia has coming in on their side is they've got some veterans that can help calm the nerves up there obviously in Knoxville. So the Tennessee game, I want to see what Joe Milton looks like before they go into that. That could obviously be one. Look, anytime you play Lane Kiffin, there's going to be a potential for an offensive explosion. So what does Ole Miss look like by that time of the year? And listen, I want to give credit where credit's due. Hugh Freeze has recruited very well at Auburn, and they've done a good job in the transfer portal. The equivalent of bringing in an entire new offense was what Hugh Freeze has done. So really nobody knows what Auburn's going to look like. And I mentioned, I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. I've been to countless Auburn games. Whether you're a Georgia fan or not, it's a great environment for a home Auburn Tiger fan. And I still remember going there in the 2017 season when they blew the doors off Georgia, and I was wearing red and black. And yes, I got heckled the whole way back to my car. But I'll tell you this, it's one of those things where it's really easy to pick on the schedule of Georgia. And like you mentioned, it's not necessarily their fault. They were supposed to have the game with Oklahoma, but fans are going to key in on that. But I'm always interested to see how that dynamic changes when we get to maybe, let's say, middle to late September. Yeah. Because there's been several years where that conversation has been had, and maybe it's a trip to Lexington, to an undefeated Kentucky team that's within the inside the top 15. Or maybe, a trip to Missouri that was a lot tougher for Georgia last year than a lot of people anticipated. It's easy to look at the preview magazine and say this is really, a cakewalk for them. And I do believe that Georgia has a great odds to go undefeated. But what I do also believe is that maybe the opinions of some of these games will change by the time we get maybe 2 or 3 weeks out from that matchup.
Yeah, man. It's just, it's college football. So who knows?
Who knows?
Who would have thought that TCU would have made the national championship game last year? And that's what makes college football so much fun. And it's the SEC, for heaven's sakes. And, when you go on the road against any team in the SEC, man, it's a dogfight. And it's the grind of the season. Now, looking at LSU's schedule, you have that big matchup with Florida State, Grambling, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Auburn, Army, Alabama, Florida State, Georgia State, and then Texas A&M. Listen, that's no cakewalk itself. That's a pretty tough schedule that LSU is going to be facing. Obviously Alabama is going to be the big challenge in the SEC West. What other teams in the SEC West are going to be maybe a challenge for LSU?
Yeah, look, I've got the schedule up here right next to me, and one date that my family has circled, I've got a couple cousins that go to school here, and we just mentioned them earlier, is that game against Auburn. Look, they're a big wild card in the SEC this year for me. If Hugh Freeze can find any early momentum in the season for them, look, that fan base travels well. The home games are going to be raucous. But them coming down to Baton Rouge is, and we can talk about this, and I'm sure you already have, but the SEC schedule reveal, I was kind of hurt that I don't get to see Auburn and LSU be maintained, because growing up in Columbus, 30 minutes from Auburn, and watching those games as an innocent bystander, it's one of the better conference games of the year every single year. Yeah. They're low scoring. They seem to be ugly, but it seems to be that kind of throwback style to old school SEC football that we saw in maybe the early 2010s and the late 2000s. I think that when you see that matchup of them coming into town, you sandwich that in between a game that, look, is going to be physically demanding and playing Army, and then a bye week. Look, the one that everyone's excited for is the road trip to Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
Can LSU do what they did last year without the home crowd? And that's been kind of the debate back and forth on social media between Alabama and LSU fans. Say, hey, come beat us at our place. Yeah. And look, LSU fans, would love to chance to do that. Would love to try to do that. The last time they did that was when they had that historical run back in 2019. So I'm excited to see what this schedule looks like. And then one more game that is going to be circled on the calendar is obviously the matchup against Texas A&M. I know a lot of people may not remember this, but if LSU would have beaten A&M last year and not lost that Thanksgiving weekend, and then somehow beaten Georgia, they probably had one of the best cases to be a 2-loss SEC champion inside the playoff with who they had beat in their schedule. And it would have been a real argument to have. That kind of ruined that opportunity for them going on the road to College Station. So A&M coming down to LSU in Baton Rouge, it's probably going to be a night game. I haven't been to one yet, Chris. I'll let you know when I do, but they say there's nothing like a night game in Death Valley, the true Death Valley down here in Baton Rouge. But look, it's a loaded schedule. Like I said, Auburn is a team for me that's going to be a wild card in the SEC West this year. Outside of that, we talked about Ole Miss. What does Mississippi State look like? They've got a veteran quarterback in Will Rogers, but what are they going to look like kind of with the tragedy that, plagued them this past offseason? So it's going to be a fun year for the SEC, Chris. And, for a lot of us folks, I think you are included in this with me. It's going to be a year of last in the SEC where we see it change forever next season.
Yeah, next season, in 2024, no divisions. The top two teams in the conference go to the conference championship, and then you have Texas, Oklahoma coming into the conference in that round robin 8 game schedule that the SEC has set up. And then also, of course, you have the expanded playoffs, the national playoffs. Mm-hmm. College football is a changing. Yeah, one of the effects, I think, of the pandemic, a lot of this started with the pandemic, with the transfer portal, and then the NIL came along, and then you got all of this going on. College football is changing with the realignment of conferences and teams going into different conferences. It's just, hey, hang on. Who knows what will happen in the next few years for sure. In recruiting, you guys at 247 Sports currently have in the 2024 rankings, Georgia at number 1 with the number 1 recruiting class. Then you have the usual suspects of Ohio State, Michigan, Florida, Notre Dame, Penn State, USC, Oregon, then at LSU at number 9. So, Georgia is stacking up again for 2024. What about LSU? How do you like that recruiting class that's coming in for 2024?
Yeah, there's been a big emphasis that was kind of lost towards the end of the Orgeron era and obviously in the beginning of Brian Kelly's. If you go there and you panel between the 2023 and 2024 class, the biggest shakeup you're going to see is the amount of kids inside the state of Louisiana that are going to be committing and coming to LSU. That's a huge, huge deal. Look, there's a reason the state of Louisiana has the most high school talent and the best high school talent per capita. It's not my fact. That's 247 Sports fact. Per capita is the key word there because I know there's a lot of talented states, and I am sitting in the camp of where Georgia is probably the best in terms of overall talent. But there's a lot of talent down here, and it doesn't take – you don't have to go a stone's throw away to find 1 or 2 high schools with 3, 4, 5-star prospects. Yeah. And LSU's really tapped into that and the idea of come play for your home state school and make an impact to win a title. And so while the class maybe doesn't have that big star power – look, this staff's not done. There's a couple of names they're still going after. One of the biggest ones is a guy actually out of Duncanville, Texas, Colin Simmons, a 5-star edge that they're really looking at. They're really aggressively pursuing, as is your Texas A&Ms, as is other programs as well, trying to secure the services of that young man. And he kind of feels like a domino effect. If he commits, he's a guy that's going to bring in a couple of the 4 stars and some high-level players. But as for this class, I mean, like I said, they're tapping into schools within a stone's throw away from Tiger Stadium to bring in that next breed of Tigers and try to win a national title. It's all about development. That's what Brian Kelly's placing emphasis on, and the early returns on it are pretty well. And the way he's respected already around the state, which took a lot sooner than I think a lot of people thought.
Yeah. One of the things missing on LSU's schedule is I would love to see for this year I guess according to what happened last year was LSU and Tulane. With
Oh
Tulane with
man.
that big win over USC in the bowl game. Man, I would love to see that. Can't we work that out somehow, some way?
I talked with some folks at a camp last week, just some LSU staffers who obviously Tulane was one of the schools there. They opened it up to all the schools, Division I, Division II schools in the state of Louisiana to come, scout kids. And there were some Tulane staffers there. And I talked with a couple people. They said, look, Tulane would love to play us. But LSU is one of those things where, the way Tulane's playing right now and the way that program trajectory is continuing to go up, it's really a lose-lose situation. If you win the game, people are like, well, you're supposed to beat them. If you lose to them, it's like, how did you lose to Tulane? So, that's an old rivalry, though, the battle of the Tiger Rag down here. It's going to be a fun season for both programs, as Tulane is definitely under Willie Fritz trending in the right direction.
I was reading, and we'll close with this. I was reading an article by Gavin Patrick. He's a well-respected writer for college football, and he says this kind of interesting. He says neither Georgia nor Alabama will make the college playoffs this year. He says, with the uncertainty at quarterback for both programs, and with the schedule somewhere down the line, Georgia's going to blow it, and Alabama's going to blow it. With only 4 teams making it. And then he said, if Georgia and Alabama does not make, and that's his projection, Georgia's opening at number 1 in the country in almost every poll. But he says somewhere down the line, Georgia's not going to make it. So who will make it if Georgia and Alabama do not make the college playoffs? And his pick is LSU and maybe Texas A&M coming out of the West. Kind of an interesting perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, interesting. Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that if you said Alabama and Georgia are not in, who is LSU may be the obvious third option just with what they did last year, the talent they returned. But, with A&M, a lot of us sat here a year ago, myself included, and said there's no way this team loses or wins less than 7 or 8 games. I mean, just the talent they have. And look, a lot of that talent left this past year through the portal. But sometimes when you lose players, it's not always the worst scenario. Look, there were a lot of behind closed doors issues with A&M, a lot of locker room issues that they had to deal with, some in-season suspensions. But I think the biggest thing for A&M in this sense is you got Bobby Petrino. What does that mean for you? Was that what you needed to get this offense over the hump? We'll see. But look, the potential's there. I mean, you go to 24/7 Sports' talent composite rating. A&M is up there. The Aggies have a lot of talent, but can it gel? Can it make a move? And while folks might be surprised if they were to make the playoff, I certainly would be. When you really got behind the scenes and you looked at the amount of talent they have on that roster, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to say, hey, this is a team, if they put it together, can go really far.
And you got to think, if Jimbo Fisher, if A&M does not have the season that, they anticipate, isn't he the one coach or one of the coaches that's really on a hot seat, even with that big buyout, multiple millions of dollars? I think he better produce this year at Texas A&M, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's down to like 80 something million this year. It's something ridiculous. Yeah. But no, I mean, I think this is a make or break year, and that's why you saw him bring in Petrino to try to take the role of that offense and develop them more. Find yourself a quarterback that really has evaded this program. I mean, you could argue realistically since the consistent days of Johnny Manziel. I mean, I don't know that they've had a guy there that they really truly felt was the consistent and complete starter they needed at all times. But look, the SEC season, like you said, is so near. We're about 3 weeks away from SEC Media Days. We'll be up in Nashville. It's going to be a lot of fun. Chris, I know that Georgia fans are raring to go to defend that third straight national title.
Who would have thunk it, man? I mean, with 40 years in between, then you have 2 in a row. I just, we're still pinching ourselves up here. And and then you look at, your roster and you look at what's coming up and you say, could it possibly be 3 in a row? Now that's la la land for sure. And, but we'll have to see if it happens. And hey, if it happened once, if it happened twice, who says it can't happen a third time?
There you go.
And,
there you go.
Well, Bryce, it's been great to catch up with you. Good luck down in the heat in the gumbo country of LSU, and take care of yourself. And it's always good to catch up with you. Thank you for being with us on our program today.
I appreciate it, Chris, as always. Thanks so much for having me on. And, just ready for football season. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yes, we will.